season on the podcast, I'm thrilled to have my close friend, Andy Wood, join us on the Bring It Out podcast today. You probably know a few things about Andy that we'll get into a little bit later on. But what you probably don't know is that he has had so much to do with all I've been bringing out in my life over the past 15 years since we've met. He's been a friend, a coach, part of the board here at Saddleback Church in San Francisco. We've gone on double dates with our wives. Stacy, that's his. Shauna, that's mine. We have taken trips to Hawaii to do our study breaks together, and we really did study. We have been able to do so many things together. Andy is the founding pastor of Echo Church here in the Bay Area, and he is now the lead pastor of Saddleback Church. And I don't know what all I should say other than, Andy, welcome to the Bring It Out podcast.
Ben, it's such an honor to be with you, man.
This is so fun. I think back, I'm already going off script, but I think back to, just where our friendship started. I think you were still in your 20s when we got to know each other, and I was just over the 30s line. So, wow, a little bit of life. We've seen a lot of things. We've seen our kids both come into our families. We've seen them grow to be, we both have quite a bit of boys, and we've seen them grow up to become young men. And just thanks so much for helping us kick off this season with the few things you have going on in your life otherwise.
Well, Ben, I'm so grateful for you and your friendship, and you and Shauna, the courage that you guys displayed to plant a church in San Francisco. And I still remember our first conversation. I was at a Pete's Coffee as you were processing the initial call to plant a church in the Bay Area. And now all the different things that God's doing through you, from this Bring It Out podcast to Shauna with the books that she's writing, and you writing a book coming up. I don't know if that's public information or not, but
it is now. No, it's good. It's out there.
Yeah. So I'm honored, man. Grateful to be with you today.
Yeah, well, when I think about you and all of the Bring It Out concepts, I mean, the first one that probably resonates with most people when I talk about it is this idea of the wisdom table. And I want to start there because you have certainly sat at the wisdom table of my life. I mean, obviously, church planting, general leadership stuff. You taught me as a dad, as a husband. We even talk about financial wisdom and kind of goals around that stuff. So I would love to talk there. This idea that there's people at this metaphorical, but I think real table called the wisdom table. Other people would say, hey, these are the board of directors for my life, or these are my coaches or my mentors. And we'll get into all the things you're doing now. But what I know for sure is that the wisdom table in your life is incredibly important, has been incredibly important. But what have you learned just about the importance of mentors, coaches, people that are able to be advisors in your life, and not just today, but like along the way? What have you learned in that process?
Yeah. Well, I think first of all, it starts with just a general attitude towards life. Like, do I believe that I can keep getting better? Do I believe that I can keep growing? And inherent in that is really the spiritual journey that we're all on, and a desire to become who God has created us to be. I think for me, when I was young, that tenacity or desire to grow was present. Some of it is personality for me, in the sense of, like, I'm just very curious about life, curious about how things work. That curiosity kind of made me an obsessive question asker, or a compulsive question asker, which over time I think started to lend itself in a good way for me. I think when I was younger, I would get on people's nerves because I'd always have so many questions for them. And then, once I got into the call that I knew God had placed on my life with ministry vocationally, I just initially started like grabbing a hold of everything I could to learn where I felt like, my life was heading, or I wanted to go, to be able to say, okay, who's been there before and how can I learn from them? So books were initially the easy way to do it. Back in the early times of ministry, there were like these cassette tapes that I picked up at a couple conferences and would listen to those. I had a mentor in college. The dean of students was a really good leader where Stacy and I went to college. My student pastor in high school mentored me. So I was like constantly just seeking out people who were ahead that I could learn and glean wisdom from. And then over time, that pursuit has only increased, like in terms of my desire to, for the wisdom I need to live the life God wants me to live. But I think my approach has had to shift and change over time as, perhaps maybe the breadth of experience has grown or needs have shifted, but that desire to have those people and really the act of pursuing those people to be in my life still's there.
I love that. And obviously, at this stage of your life, you are seeking wisdom that would have made no sense 20 years ago, or probably even 10 years ago. And I love that you pointed out that you first started with books. I think that's a great point, because what everyone will assume about you today, and it's true, is that you now can get lots of people to return your email questions, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or your, hey, can you so and so, because you track record, the prominent role you're in now, all the things that you've been a part of. But yeah, what do you say to the person who, and maybe it is just that, like, hey, just start with books or find a conference or whatever, but the person who, man, they know what they want wisdom for. And by the way, I think that's super important. Be clear, as Andy said, about what do you need wisdom for? Not 5 years from now. What do you need wisdom for in this season? But how could they go find that if they don't have a direct connection to the ideal person in a way that they could get coffee with that person?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I think that there's a couple of different ways to look at it. Like, one way to look at it, there's the content that you're trying to absorb, or the wisdom that you're trying to gain. That's one thing. And some of that is like disseminated or received relationally, but some of that is just received by listening. You don't necessarily need a relationship with somebody to be able to get that kind of wisdom. So, for example, there are people that are great that I have access to from a mentorship standpoint, but I may gain just as much listening to their podcast as I would in a 30-minute conversation with them. So I don't necessarily think that there's like this magical, like, if I can just get in touch with this person or connected to this person, that all of a sudden it's going to change everything. And I do think that there are certain doors that can get open for you in terms of, like, for example, there's certain hacks on life that maybe somebody might have figured out that they can help you move through quicker. And those kinds of things are super helpful. But I like to think in terms of, okay, one is the overarching direction of my life, like where I believe God wants me to go. And for me, this includes, kind of this different facets of life, from my spiritual growth to my relationships with my family, my kids, my physical health, my financial well-being, character development, which probably should go first, but that's connected to really relationship with God. So there are certain people that I want to ask the question, like, okay, if I ended up on the path that this person is on, like, would I be happy? Like, would I be pleased with my life if, when I'm where this person is in their 60s or 70s or whatever, would I be pleased with that? But then there are other people, for example, like, I'm working with a nutritionist right now, and I'm not having any conversations with him about his marriage.
So good. You do not need that from him.
I'm not asking him, right? Yeah, it's a him. I'm not asking him to give me advice on date night with my wife. I just need him to be good at nutrition. And so I think, of course, mindset wise, he's going to impact me on mindset. But if I can let somebody impact or help me in a way that they're good at, like this nutritionist I'm working with, he's younger than me. There's a lot of things about where he is that I don't need that, but I do need what he's bringing to the table in terms of the wisdom around nutrition. So looking at certain domains of life to say, okay, well, there's somebody here that's done a good job. And I believe that God's wisdom, in terms of what the scripture teaches, that God's wisdom works in every domain of life. Sometimes God's wisdom takes longer than what the world would tell you can accomplish. So you might be able to take a faster path in terms of shortcut. But God's wisdom has a way, like the proverb says, that the wise person gathers financially little by little, and then over time they have wealth. So God's way is sometimes a slower build, but it's more like an oak tree. So I'm convinced that all of God's wisdom, the more absorbed I am in God's
Mm.
wisdom, the more that's going to help every facet of my life. So in my 30s, I made a decision to read through the Proverbs, and I literally would just go through a proverb a day and just say, okay, what are the things that I can absorb for my personal life from the
Yeah.
Proverbs, and then try to live them out. And then I think over time, then you just get more specialized in what you're looking for with wisdom. But judgment, the ability to make good, sound decisions, like that skill of judgment
Yeah.
and decision making, is a decision that if you have a global kind of wisdom and a spiritual wisdom that's beyond just one domain, it allows you to step into a lot of different facets of life and offer wisdom or thoughts that might benefit or help other people. So I just have wanted, I think of that wisdom as like layer after layer after layer after layer after layer, and the choice on a repetitive basis to like pursue God's ways and to let that form internally. So I think a table is a part of it, but there's also a path that it's connected to as well. And I think that the table is pointing you towards the path of wisdom.
Yeah.
So that's more than you were asking me, but
No, but that's good. I think in two things before we move on. I think one is, to your point, we need more than one person at that wisdom table. Like, somebody may be great for your spiritual life, but they may not be able to help you financially, and vice versa. And I think most people sit at our wisdom table only for a season, and it doesn't, sometimes something's wrong, and so they need to be dismissed. But other times it's just that you've outgrown their wisdom, and they've never done the thing that you're seeking to do next. And speaking of the thing you're seeking to do next, people know that you're the lead pastor of Saddleback Church, and I know that 30 years ago, 20 years ago, 10 years ago, 5 years ago, you wouldn't have seen this. So I don't want to talk about how we predict our futures, but why don't you like look back, because a lot of people know what you're doing now, but they don't know how you got here. Look back. There's two things I would love for you to talk about that fit, even though as surprising as this was when it all came on, in some ways, like, you have this incredible passion to see people know and follow Jesus. And you have an incredible passion for strategic leadership. In fact, I've told you this, that you're as strategic as any leader I know, and you care about people far from God as much as anyone that I know. So like, that didn't begin with you being the pastor of Saddleback. Like, how long ago can you look back and say, because I think a lot of people have seeds in them today and they're not sure what the future holds, but God's going to use stuff that he planted in them probably long ago. So how far back can you look in those two worlds and say, like, okay, this is still crazy, but it makes a little more sense because of.
Yeah. So when I look back, going all the way back to college. So my first assignment in vocational ministry was, I was a freshman in college. I served as a middle school minister at the local Baptist church that Stacy and I attended while we were in college. And I remember taking my role so seriously. Like I remember I would travel over to the church. I'd set up the chairs. I was also serving on student governance. For some odd reason, it was the secretary at the time, which is like the worst role for my unique wiring. But the passion and tenacity and diligence that I feel like I try to bring to my job now, I had that same level of tenacity and passion when I was trying to reach middle school students in Summerville, South Carolina. And I'm working as hard as I know how to work, and as strategically and as wise as I know how to work, and being as engaged as I know how to be engaged. But I don't remember a season looking back that it wasn't like that for me. I mean, there's been tough seasons where, you're more melancholy and it's harder than others. But just from a general pursuit of life, I've been trying to do the best I can with what God's put in my hands since I was 18. I mean, really earlier than that. So one verse that spoke to me when I was probably, early college was when Jesus said, if you're faithful with little, you'll be faithful with much. So faithfulness, sometimes I think people think, well, if I get a little bit more, I'll work a little bit harder. If I get a little
Yes,
bit
it does
more, I'll
not.
be a little
Yeah.
bit more faithful. And it's just not how life works. It's not how people work. So the same intensity that you would expect somebody should bring to a role that's beyond where you are now, you want to bring that same level of intensity, So I also think in integrity and making the hard right choice that nobody else sees, although when you're younger, you don't see those things and you don't feel it as much when you're like in your early 20s. But I think that there's a compound interest with integrity and honesty and character that God opens doors, and then doors open that, just based upon doing the right thing behind the scenes in a way that honors God. And then for me personally, with this whole decision to come to Saddleback, I could say this honestly before God. I was not pursuing a position here. I wasn't pursuing a position outside the church. I've never, I guess I did a job application when I was like in high school or college, but there was no like job application that I hopped onto some website to fill out.
Yeah.
It really was one of my mentors from afar, Rick Warren, said, would you preach at Saddleback? And I said, yeah. And then God used that. Now I was on a journey there,
Sure.
with some things God was doing in my heart. But sometimes I think people in kind of this journey of 20s and 30s, you run into this like constantly looking to the next thing, where it's really a matter of how can I be as faithful as I know how to be? Things like a daily task list and things like, managing my time well and disciplining myself and having good meetings that, run efficiently and get things done, and developing the people around me so that they can sort, like all those little things.
Sure.
That I think, in the Bible, there's the story of Naaman who goes and he's like this powerful leader that wants to be healed. And when he gets to Israel, the commission for him for healing was to go wash in the Jordan 7 times. And he's like, well, couldn't you just do something miraculous and like wave your hand? And really what the simplicity of that thing that he was called to do, it seemed beneath him. But like, there's so many things in the stuff I'm having to do now is the same stuff I was having to do at Echo, is the same stuff I was having to do in a church plant. It's the same stuff I was doing when I was a student minister. I was sitting, at a desk with a Bible and I was writing a sermon. I was sitting across from coffee with people, trying to do my very best to pour into them. I was sitting across from a mentor, trying to ask the right question. Like all those things that they scale, character scales, integrity scales with more opportunity. And I think if you see your skills and your character as like the asset that goes with you wherever you go, you'll invest more deeply in who you're becoming, and then you don't have to worry about those doors opening. But I think the other thing too is the kind of relationships. The relationships that we're building along the way are like, I have this belief, every relationship that God puts me in touch with is either for, there's something God wants to use me to do in that person's life, or them to do in my, and usually it's vice versa. So you're collecting relationships in life, and the way you treat people and love people and care for people, that also opens up doors. So I guess this is just a long way of saying, when you're faithful, opportunity finds faithfulness. You don't have to push so hard as sometimes we're led to believe.
I love that. And yeah, I mean, just a few thoughts on that. One is, gosh, what you're saying is spot on. Like, be careful if you're listening, like be careful that your talent doesn't take you to a place where your character can't sustain you. And I would also say, how you do with little might determine whether you get more.
Mhm.
And what you do in obscurity when the light isn't, when the spotlight's not on you, it may have something to say about your future. And so, yeah, I mean, don't despise small beginnings, whatever it is. I mean, I think about, almost anything, like 13 of us in a living room trying to get this church off the ground in San Francisco. If we would have been like, I couldn't just show up I guess somebody else could have showed up when there was 200 people, but like that's all we had. No one knew we existed. No one knew we existed, not anywhere in the world or here in San Francisco, especially. But I think what we did back then still paves the way for what we're doing, a dozen years later. So I think you've shown me that. And then as we think about like transition, your story is unique. You started Echo Church and you walked away from that. Rick Warren started Saddleback Church, and then as he was walking away, you took that role. So I do think there's something interesting about being a founder and taking over for a founder, a perspective you have. But I think there's probably a lot of people listening that are considering transitions. And so we can kind of go any way you want to, but anything you want to say about the founder piece, or just generally how to think about transitions in general for people that, could be like wading through that decision-making opportunity?
Yeah, so I think that there's a couple things, two things that are like probably apply to a lot of people, and then maybe a third one that applies in some more like kind of founder situations.
Yeah.
There's like the outgoing decision. There's like that first new chunk of time when you come to a new place and some things there. And then there's kind of stepping into a role that maybe you didn't build the role. So with the decision, I think you want to pay attention to at a deeper level. Sometimes there are things that are stirring in you, and maybe that stirring is a different way of doing the same thing that you've been doing. Sometimes that stirring is maybe a different perspective, a different heart behind it. And then sometimes there's a stirring that God might be moving you on. I got to a place where it was hard. I'm such a visionary, futuristic thinker. I got to a place where I was having a hard time really envisioning the rest of my life doing what we were doing. And I kept praying about it because I thought I had a lifelong call to pastor in the Bay Area. Kept praying. Stacy would keep saying, go back and pray more. And I'd pray more. But I couldn't shake it. And that was before the conversation with Saddleback got started. And I had said in my prayer time to God, I said, God, if you've got something different from me, go look. So I'm not going to go fill out a job application. Like literally, you have to bring it to me. You have to put it in Stacy's heart. And then we'd need for a solution for what you called us to start here. Those three things to me would be a sign that you want me to do something different. And God checked all three of those prayers, or answered all three of those prayers. So Psalm 32:8 says, the Lord will guide you along the very best pathway for your life. And I believe God, when you're trying to walk in obedience to God, he'll order your steps. If there's some piece of it that you're concerned about, I think you can ask God for help with it. Like, hey, I'm concerned about, do I look for something different? Because I wouldn't say my word is the same word for anybody else. Sure. I just had such a clear calling to do the thing that we were doing, that I really needed God to intervene on my behalf on that part. So I think you can be open and honest with God about what's happening on the inside. I think you got to choose who you're open and honest with, because some people are in situations where, like, if they have that kind of honesty with a boss, they're gone.
Sure.
But I think just being honest about it, and then trusting God with, what are the steps I need to be taking in this. And he may lead you to put a resume together, but he may lead you just to wait. And trusting God both with the ultimate decision and then trusting him with the process was key for me. In the calling, I think that my calling here was much more of a Polaroid picture calling. So it was like, it got clearer and clearer the further into the journey. Yeah.
that Echo was somewhat of a Polaroid picture, but it was also a little bit like a lightning strike, and in terms of God giving vision to, I want you to start a church here. So with all that being said, when you step into a new role, and let's say you're clear that that's the right thing to do, because I think a lot of people are in this season with the last few years of world history and all that, people are shifting a lot. You never want to presume coming into a new role that you're going to be successful. So like I've tried to presume it's very possible that this thing could flop. Like it's very possible that I could be the guy that runs this historical ministry into the ground.
Wow.
That coming at it from that angle makes me a little bit more hungry, and a little bit more, it humbles me to think that way and grounds me. And then there's a lot of great resources. Like I think it's called the First 90 Days book is a great book. And that book just gives some really good filters in terms of the kind of decisions that you need to make where you're trying to secure early wins. People are very quickly assessing your intent. Like, why do you do the things that you do? But they're also assessing your capacity. So do you have the ability to move whatever your given domain is forward? And so I wanted to do a good job and secure some early wins in the process. And then with a founder, I think I've tried my very best to honor the foundation and the founder, and to recognize, like, knowing this would not be what it is without a whole lot of sacrifices that nobody sees, and obedience and good leadership and wisdom. And it's easy, the longer something goes, to become more critical of that thing, and to not, so I'm really like on a mission to find what are the great things that need to be pointed to in the foundation or in the founder, and not feel the need like, oh, I've got to establish myself as, or differentiate myself in terms of like, I'm the new leader, I've got a better vision, all that stuff. It's more like bridging the past and the present while honoring the founder. Now, again, maybe for somebody who steps into a tech company that's 4 years old and the founder was there for 3.5 and did something stupid, it's like a totally different scenario. But I'm stepping into a 42-year-old organization when I came, and the founder had been faithful, and he and his wife Kay, Pastor Rick and Kay, had done a great job. So all that to say, I also need to be myself and be free to be myself, and chart a course for the future, the new vision. So I tried to honor the past. I wanted to build rapport. I wanted to get to know people. I wanted to ask good questions. I wanted to learn, but then start moving towards who's the team around me, and what are my systems and structures that help me be successful, and what are the decisions I need to make in the near future to, see lift happen here. So all that is, I think for me, has been more of an art than a science. Just trying to come back to what are those key principles that I'm trying to function from.
That's so good. And I had the privilege almost right out a year ago to be both at a private dinner and the public service where Rick passed the baton to you. And even as your friend, like, just such a humbling and special moment to know that God had he had called Rick for a long season that you just mentioned, and that he was calling you into this new season. And just to be a part of that was wild. I know that there's challenges around lots of things, but even around like identity and significance, how, not just now, but like how have you wrestled with that? Has it been a struggle? I mean, even when we're not at churches that are known globally, it's still like, oh, I see myself, I am the pastor of this, or I'm the the person who works at this company, or here's what I've accomplished. How, if that has been a struggle, how has it been a struggle? And then what has been really helpful for you? Maybe even some of the things you already mentioned.
Yeah. Well, I think we all have our own issues, right? We all have our own ways that certain subjects impact us individually. I certainly have moments where I deal with a tremendous amount of insecurity. I have thoughts that go through my mind like, man, I wonder if these guys made the biggest mistake, of their lives hiring me. I had moments when we were church planting where, we'd grow and then I'd think, oh, this thing's outgrown me, and then we'd grow again and I would think it's outgrown me. And I kept thinking that throughout. I had to deal with that my whole journey. So I think those voices, what you learn to do is you learn to like turn them down a bit. And because I don't, maybe there are some people that those voices like completely go away, like they never have those thoughts anymore. But for me, it's once I could categorize that, to be able to be like, okay, this is my insecure voice talking here. This is however you want to label that, where that's coming from. To be able to label it as insecurity, or to be able to put, the slap on it, the label, that's a lie, like, oh, that's a lie. Sometimes it's straight from the pit of hell.
Yeah.
I think that helps me a bit. I do have some tactics in terms of like what I do to help me in my thinking. And, if I'm in a room with a bunch of like really important people, sometimes the temptation would be to go towards like the most important person. So I will often like say, okay, who's the person in this room that I could find that I could minister to and love on and invest in. So if I'm in a room with a bunch of cool leaders that are so hip and icons and all that, like I think, okay, who is here that today maybe they're going through something that a 15-20 minute conversation would be a game changer for them, and I try to like get my way to that conversation.
Now I'm wondering if you came over to me the first time because I wasn't one of the cool kids in the room.
Well, you called me, so
now I know how we built this relationship.
now I avoid you though when we're in rooms because you're so significant.
Sorry, I interrupted.
Significant, such a bad word. That's such a bad way of labeling that, but you know what I mean. You're such a big dog now.
So much.
I think that mindset actually was cultivated for me like in the last 5 to 7 years.
Yeah, I like that.
Because I think I started getting in rooms more where I did feel insecure. Like should I be in this room? I don't. These people are all way more important. So that the other thing too is sometimes you'll be in rooms where everybody's like super cool and they wear a certain style of clothes but really the only thing they're thinking about is themselves and the clothes that they're wearing. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like they're not coming to that room thinking, oh, I'm gonna assess whether or not you're like you've got the. I'm really insecure
all
myself.
about me.
Yeah. So that's where I'm like, well, the energy and effort to try to be somebody that you're not for such an underwhelming response is not worth it. I'd rather just be like, who am I? I kind of have figured out what my brand is on t-shirts that I wear. I wear kind of the same shoes and clothes. So because it's just not worth all that stuff is going to fade away so quickly.
Yeah.
Not that I don't want to look nice or be a slob or anything. I don't want to give any more of my life or attention to that kind of stuff than I need to.
That's good.
But I don't say all that to say I haven't figured it out. I still struggle. I think the more focused I am on helping people,
agreed,
the less identity is an issue to me. And I think sometimes there's such a voice right now about discovering you and who you are and your identity, and and some of that is just this. Even some of the stuff around like getting to what's on the inside of you. And I'm sure a therapist could totally pick apart what I'm saying right now, but there is something to be said in terms of like, there's a point where I'm like, I don't want to think about me. I don't want to think about, my all this stuff. And I need to be secure enough in who God's made me. And another way to think about this is like, I was with my dad a few weeks ago, and he had this men's ministry event. And when I was in town, he had me speak for it. And there was, a bunch of guys from his church that came. And so we were like doing ministry together. Well, when I was there with my dad, I'm not like I don't have anything to prove to my dad. I'm there with my dad doing ministry, right? My dad's ministering to guys. My dad's not a pastor, he's a plumber, but I'm doing ministry with him. So I think to have a relationship with your Heavenly Father, that you're secure and you're getting your affirmation and your accolades and your security from relationship with Him. And then you're going about your day and you're working and you're doing your thing, and you've got that reminder of His voice that's still there carrying you, but you're not looking for identity from something. You're not doing something to get that identity. It's coming from a place inside of you.
No, I love that. It's so good. Every person listening to our conversation right now has 24 hours a day. I have 24 hours a day. You have 24 hours a day. Doesn't matter what your title is. God didn't give you an 8th day a week. He didn't give you a 25th or 30th hour. You have 3 kids. You're leading this church and all the things. So what seems to happen for all of us, doesn't matter if we're the pastor of Saddleback Church, leading Epic Church, or whatever else you guys are doing who are listening, over time, when you even have a little bit of success, or of course a lot of success, the opportunity for more relationships increases, and just the more opportunities to do more things increases, but you still have the same 24 hours. So Andy, my guess is that, not my guess, I know that you have no more time than you had 10 years ago, 2 years ago, 20 years ago, but you've got a lot more requests. How are you kind of filtering through what are the yeses and getting to a place of peace with everything else being a no, and any general stuff that would be helpful for us today?
Yeah, there's a lot here. I tend to try to put faces with decisions. So like, what does my yes here mean? So if I say yes to this, so I remember when we first came here, we had this like capital campaign meeting for one of our campuses that was trying to raise money, and I had to back out of something because it ended up being a championship game for my son's football. And so I ended up going late at the end of the meeting, but I wasn't going to go before, the game was over with my son. And I don't even know if my son remembers now, but he probably would have remembered if I wasn't there. And I just thought, okay, if I know I actually got a disappointed email from the campus pastor, but I also know that I tried to put his disappointment next to my son's, and that helped me with that decision. I mean,
that's a killer point.
I think as many decisions that you can make pre-decision. So, for example, like you're planning your week before the week hits, having a good morning routine and a good evening, kind of as much as you can control those two things. It's harder with teenagers with the evening, but saying, okay, this is what I do in the morning. And then, there's a part of me that loves to linger a lot longer than I have the freedom to. So this is true about my time with God in the morning. Like I have an hour, I could easily go 2 hours. But I also need to take the boys to school, and also need to get sleep, prior to that. And then in addition to that, I want to work out before I leave home, so I'm healthy physically. So I just have to decide and say, okay, well, an hour, if I spend an hour a day, and then if I get to the office and I want to go deeper on something I read in the Bible that morning, or I want to spend more time in prayer, I can do that. But if I'm not done in an hour, I'm not going to get my workout in. If I don't get my workout in, then I'm going to keep putting on my Saddleback 17 that I put on. And so I all that, like trying to decide in advance And
Yeah.
then when that voice internally is like, well, you should feel guilty for not spending more time, or you should, just to
Yes.
just say, you know what, I've already decided, this decision's already been made for me. That's one principle.
Helpful.
Another one is putting your more significant big rocks in first. So whatever those things are, whether it's like, your family time, your time reading the Bible, time working out, and then just letting everything fill in around those. I mean, that's the age-old big rock
So
principle.
good
But
though. Helpful.
yeah, sometimes it's so simple that you could be tempted to be like, well, maybe
Yeah.
maybe I could figure out another way to do it. But I just have found, if I do, like, for example, I've found if I have 2.5 hours to 3 hours in the morning, in addition to my time with God and working out, of working on content, at the end of the
Yes.
weekend, I feel so much better about my message. And if I get that done before I do anything else, leadership wise, I feel so much better. I have a hard time going from leadership to content. I can go content to leadership, but it's
Same.
hard to
Same.
flip. So, sometimes you have to create boundaries for yourself that you don't really want to
Mhm.
hold, but you just look at, okay, if I do this long enough consistently, it's going to get me where I want to go. And my deeper desire or bigger vision is trumping this kind of ADHD kid inside of me that wants
Yeah.
the freedom to do whatever I want to do when I want to do it. And I just have less freedom. One other thing, I know I'm like going principle to principle here,
No,
but
give it to us.
one other thing I think is that you have to, I've had in this role to get more comfortable with disappointing people,
Mm.
and the knowledge that there's constantly somebody that I'm letting down. There's constantly somebody who's not happy with. There's constantly somebody who's not getting what they want from me. And I've got to trust God to fill in the gaps and realize, like, the Holy Spirit is more than enough for every person.
So
I'm
good.
not more than enough. I'm limited. And it's hard because, like, I'm an extrovert. I'm relational. I like being around people, but I just have less. I have more people that I haven't responded to in the season. There's more people I want to spend time with that I don't get to spend time with. There's friends I've been friends with for a long time I hardly get to see anymore. And I'm really like, okay, I'm honestly thinking, okay, my parents, my dad is 66,
Yeah.
my mom's 61. How much longer do they have? I'm thinking my kids are grown up. They're going to be out of the house. How much longer do they have? And probably 5 to 10 years from now, I'll be in a totally different season in terms
Yeah.
of margin with friendships. And so any kind of friendship that I'm cultivating, it kind of has to fit into the life that God's called me to live. And it just is what it is. It's sad. I've had a number of people, there are people that I've hurt their feelings, and I have to circle back and be like, it's not personal that I can't hang out with you. Even staff, people in the church, they want more from you than you
Sure.
can give.
Yeah.
So my job is not to help everybody. My job is to create a structure and systems and a culture that allow people to get the help that they need.
Yeah.
And if I'm the one helping everybody, I'm not going to do that assignment, and fewer people that need help are going to get help.
Dude, that's so good. I know that we could go on talking, and I look forward to the next conversation online or offline. But any last thing you would say to kick off this season 3 or bring it out as people are thinking about what God has deposited in them, and maybe there's obstacles in the way, but any just kind of last couple thoughts before we sign off here?
Yeah, when it comes to bringing it out, I love that vision, Ben, that you have, and like your faithfulness in this direction. And I would just say that bringing it out is like, it's a lifelong journey, right? There's tucked inside of every person, there's brilliance. Tucked inside of every person, there's genius. There are parts of you that are unique to who God has made you to be. You bring things to the world that nobody else brings to the world. And to believe that to your core, and just to know that sometimes when you're starting and you're in your 20s some of those things are not as clear as they will be one day,
Sure.
but just to stay the course and not let, you know, the difficulty and the hardship and the pain and the patience that's required prevent you from staying the course that will get you to the place where you're able to fully live out the calling that God's given to your life.
So good, man. And you've taught me personally and now taught a whole bunch of people all about this, and just grateful for you giving us some time to kick off season 3 of the Bring It Out podcast. You guys can find Andy at saddleback.com, and I'm sure lots of other places online. And yeah, just thrilled for the journey that we're going to go on this year. And I know you've been blessed by this episode, so please take some time to comment and make sure you share it with people who would benefit from our conversation. And we will see you next time.
Thanks.